Have you ever had somebody come into your life who left a profound impact? Maybe it was a teacher or a professor in college. Maybe it was a friend, someone who came along and changed things around for you. Maybe it was a coworker or a boss. I'm guessing most of us have had people in our lives who have changed us throughout our time. We came into contact with this person and we left differently. I have multiple people who have marked my life and ministry. Easiest one to think about is back in college. And I had spent a couple years in college at Nebraska Christian College, and I was learning how to preach, and they were teaching you, this is how you do your 3 points, and exegesis, and all this stuff that they teach you how to preach. And then along came I had gone there partially knowing that I really liked their preaching department head. I liked this man. His name was Shane Wood, and he was really good. And he taught me for 2 years, and I really enjoyed that time. And then it became known that he was going to be moving on, and he was going to become the dean of academics, and so he wouldn't be one-on-one with the preaching students anymore. And so I was a little upset. This is why I'm here, and I want to learn how to preach. And they announced that they were hiring a man who had retired from ministry. And I remember thinking, I just remember thinking, this guy's passion is gone, and he's not going to have it anymore, and he's going to have given up on it. He's done trying, and he's just wasting out his waning years here. And boy, was I ever wrong, and I've told him so many times. His name is David Haynes, and we've had him preach here a few times for me. And Mr. Haynes came in, and I remember the first time I was sitting in a preaching class, and he asked the question, do you know the value of one human soul? And I sat there and realized that this man was different than I had thought. He spoke with such passion about Jesus that it really changed my understanding of preaching. No longer was I learning how to preach, and here's the ways that you put together a sermon and a sermon series, and here's how you put it all together. But now I was learning why we preached, because here was a man who taught me what it was to have passion for God's people, to have passion for the lost, to have passion for the church, the way Jesus had a passion for the church. And he left me changed. And for that, I'm very grateful. I could go back and look at different people in my life. Most of us can. I'm guessing that if I asked you who has marked your life, at least one person pops into your head. Someone has made a difference in your life. Someone had power in your life to make a change. Maybe you were going down the wrong road as a youth and someone slapped you upside the head. Maybe you didn't know what you were going to do and somebody came along and gently guided you toward the right decisions. I don't know who it was, but I'm guessing someone has come into your life and made a difference and made a change. Today we are continuing on with our series, The Power of One. And today our series we're talking the power of one person. What can one person really do? That's the question that usually comes across. What can I do? I look at the world's big bad problems and all the struggles that we have in our nation, let alone the entire world, and what can I do? And you sit out there and you probably say to yourself, I'm too young to make a difference. No one will listen to me. Or may you say, I'm too old to make a difference. No one will listen to me. Or may you say, I'm too busy. My life is too full. How would I make a difference in this big world? Today we're going to talk about the power of one. In order to understand the power of one person, we're going to look at the story of David and Goliath. If you have your Bibles, go ahead and open up to 1 Samuel chapter 17 this morning. 1 Samuel 17. If you don't have them, the words will also be on the screen. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Israel is at war. And they're at war with the Philistines. This is their arch nemesis, the neighboring country that always seems to be causing them problems. And so they're prepared for battle, and the two armies set up on different sides of the valley. And they are prepared to fight each other. And the soldiers standing across from each other decide to scope out the competition. This was pretty common amongst war in this time, that they'd line up and see what the other side had to offer. In sports, we do the same thing. You watch game film, so you know the opponent's strengths and weaknesses. Here on this battlefield, you go over and you look at the other side, you count the number of men and you count the number of chariots and horses, and you look at them and you say, are they too young, are they too old, or do they look like they're real fighters? You look at their armor, do they look well armored? Do you look at their swords, do they have swords, or are they armed with pitchforks? You look at the army across from you and you decide, what is this going to take? Can we win this battle? When looking over to the other side, it became very clear that the Philistines had one big advantage. And this big advantage, his name was Goliath. Goliath stood over 9 feet tall. Over 9 feet tall this man stood. Now it was customary during these days that if you didn't have to fight the battle, if there was some way that you could solve this in another way, they wouldn't fight it. I mean, these men, they had wives and children at home. They had farms to get back to. No one on either side wanted to die or to risk their life. And so often, they would follow the custom of each army putting out their best fighter. Winner takes all. This is how they could save their entire army. This is how men could go back to their wives and children. This is how you could solve it with just one person putting their life on the line. Now, normally this is great. It will save lives and it's fair. But that's only true when Goliath isn't in the mix. And here there's a man who stands over 9 feet tall, well armored, a killer. And he stands on the other side. So Goliath stands up, and starting in verse 8, follow along with me. Goliath stood and shouted at the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, or are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will be our subjects and serve us." Now you can imagine, nobody in their right mind wants to fight this man. This is the biggest man you have ever seen. This is the guy that stands up and you immediately regret picking a fight. This is the man that you look at and you start to get weak in the knees because there's no way that you can defeat him. His sword is bigger than you are. That's the type of man you're fighting. And so when he begins to challenge you, the men in the army cower in fear. In verse 11, on hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. Now Saul is the tallest man in Israel. That's one, well, maybe not the tallest, but one of the tallest men in Israel. That's one of his claims to fame as he becomes king. And he is also terrified because he pales in comparison to the man on the other side of the battlefield. Because this Philistine is huge. No one wants to fight Goliath. No one wants that struggle. No one needs that in their life. But if no one is willing, they will lose their country. And most likely their women and children will be hauled off. Their grain stores and any of their cattle and livestock might be taken from them. Anything that they consider theirs might be hauled off. And they'll be left alone, alive, but with nothing left. And so here the men stand, petrified, not knowing what to do. How do they step up and beat Goliath? They wait for someone who's willing to do something. And while they waited, every morning and every evening, Goliath would come out and challenge them. And he would insult God and defy them to stop him. For 40 days he did this. That's over a month that they stood there in their lines, that they would come out ready for battle. And Goliath would challenge them and say, not everyone needs to die. Put out your best fighter and I will step up for us. And for 40 days, no one did a thing. Have you ever felt stuck? Have you ever felt petrified to move forward or to do something? I think most of us have been there at some point in our lives, like things will never change at home or at your job or in your life. And maybe you felt the sting of Goliath's words as he insulted you, and this world insults you and says, you'll never get it together. You'll never move forward. And you have felt too helpless to make a difference. And this is the point in the story where we see the power of one person. Enter David. Now David's 3 oldest brothers were in the army for Saul. They were on the opposing side of Goliath. They were there. And David was at home tending to the sheep. After 40 days of battle and 40 days of Goliath insulting them, David's father sends David to take food to his brothers. And so he loads them up and heads them to see his brothers. And David arrives as Goliath is making his morning threats. Picking up in verse 25. Now the Israelites have been saying, "Do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him. He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." Now that might be the first time you've actually heard that last part, and you might be thinking, no taxes? Either I die or I don't pay tax. This is not as bad of a deal as you thought going up against Goliath. But not even that is enough to get men to be willing to step up. Everyone in the army has declined. Everyone has said, "No, I'm not going to do it." David steps up to the plate, though. David steps up to the plate, and he says, "Don't lose faith because of this man. I will go and fight him." If you want to see the power of one person, you have to be brave. Look at David. David's just a young man. David's not a skilled fighter. He's not a skilled soldier. But he's brave. If you want to see the power of one person, it starts with bravery. If you want to see it, it starts with bravery. You have to be the one that runs towards the trouble. It was heartbreaking to see what happened in Vegas a week ago. And honestly, devastating that one of our own are among the victims. But as we heard the stories, I couldn't help but be moved by the people who laid their lives out for others. The husbands who would lay their body over their wife to protect her. The people who didn't know the people that they were running back to save, but risked their lives to do it. And then we saw those stories, and you can't help but be moved by that kind of love. And you know that there are people who are brave. And we see them like that. We see them in our own community. We see them in police officers and firefighters, people who put their lives on the line. And we can't help but be thankful. David's life reminds us that if you want to see the power of one person, you have to be brave. Do what no one else will do. Do what no one else will do. Now, King Saul wasn't about to let David go in on his own, not wearing armor and no sword. So, picking up in verse 38. Then Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them. "I cannot go in these," he said to Saul, "because I'm not used to them." So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the stream. He put them in a pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. The second thing we must do if we want to see the power of one person is you have to be you. You have to be you. You have to be brave, but you have to be you. You can't pretend to be somebody else and have God use you in big ways. You can't try to be what everybody else wants you to be and what everybody else expects you to be, because God has made you exactly the way that you should be. He has designed you for a purpose. God created you special by design. David, dressed in Saul's armor with the big helmet and the heavy sword, it must have looked a little bit like when I put one of my t-shirts on Canon this last week. My 1.5-year-old, as he walked around the house and it looked like a dress. Here's a boy wearing a very large man's armor. And it's not going to work. It's not what he was supposed to do. Everybody else dressed in armor, carrying a sword. And they were all cowering in fear. Everybody else was dressed for battle. Everybody else was ready for this. But everybody else was cowering in fear. I tell you this, I don't believe if David went out there with a sword that he would have been victorious. That was not God's plan for him. And I tell you, so many times in our lives, we don't accomplish the things that He wants us to do because we're too busy trying to be something else, to fit in with the Joneses or keep up with everybody else and look just like the rest of our world. And we try and do this and try and do this and try and fit in. And I tell you, we can't accomplish God's purposes if we spend all of our time trying to fit in. God has uniquely designed you. That means you are one of a kind. You're not just part of the crowd. You're not just another one. You are an individual. Use your talents for God because He gave you your talents. He gave you those special things, those things that make you special. And David takes his sling and his stones. He takes a sling and stones to go up against a man with a javelin that most of us couldn't even pick up. He goes against a man with a shield that would cover our entire body. He goes against a man who has been a fighter all the days of his life, and he goes at him with stones. But I tell you, David wasn't going to win a sword fight. God created you to be you. Don't try and change. Don't try and make yourself just like everybody else, thinking that if I were just like, and picture some great person that you want to be like, then I could accomplish what God is wanting me to do. No, I tell you, God has given you everything you need to do what He has called you to do. Use what you have for God. Don't try and be like everyone else. Finally, if you want to see the power of one person, trust fully in God. Trust fully in God. Picking up in verse 45. David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds of the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those who gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and He will give it all of you, into our hands." Those are pretty bold statements for a man not carrying a sword. To declare that you're going to cut off his head. You don't even have a sword. Here's a man who trusts in God. He doesn't trust in the size of himself. He's not trusting that he can overpower this great big giant. He's not trusting that his weapons are better or superior. He's not trusting that he is in any way smarter or wiser or that more skilled. He is trusting that God is going to intervene. That God is going to do something. I know sometimes it looks like we have no chance of winning in our lives. You come across circumstances and situations and you say, there's no way. How could I overcome that? And situations look hopeless and it seems as though all is lost. Trust God when you're David and Goliath is barking insults at you. Trust God when you are David and Goliath is over there insulting you and saying you can't do it. Trust God in those situations because He's the only one that matters. And we get the picture from this story. David's brothers don't believe in him. Saul doesn't believe in him. His own army doesn't believe in him, let alone the man he's going up against. But none of that matters. All that matters is that he believes in God. It doesn't matter who you've got behind you, all these people that you've lined up. Who have you placed your trust in? Those people or your God? You doubt one person can make a difference. It's easy to do. To doubt one person can make a difference. How could I ever make a difference? You don't know my problems and my struggles and my flaws and failures. How could I ever make a difference? David saved hundreds, if not thousands of lives by being brave, being himself, and trusting God fully. One person can have that type of impact. One person can have that type of impact. In fact, we wouldn't gather here every Sunday if it were not for the power of one person in Jesus Christ. We wouldn't gather on Sundays if it wasn't for one person. And much like David, he had to be brave. No one wants to die. No one wants to go to the cross and experience excruciating pain. But he said to his Father, "Not my will, but your will be done." He had to be himself. In a world where everyone tries to get ahead and be popular, Jesus said very unpopular things. In a world where he could have been a king, he chose to be a servant. And finally, he trusted God completely, even to his death. I tell you, the power of one. Jesus has plans for us. And I want to see what he can do when one person after another is unleashed for him. I want to see the power of one person. And I want to see what it looks like when they stand side by side and we stand up to evil. I want to see what it looks like when we are brave and completely trusting God. I want to see what the world will look like when we are his and his fully. And I want to know, will you help me make the world different? Because only when we all give in and all start following him and trusting him and being brave and giving him all that we are, when we start doing that, we will see this world change. The power of one, God uses one. That's what he does. As the praise team comes up this morning, maybe you haven't given your life to him at all. Maybe you've never made that decision for yourself to follow him. Today I want to let you know that you need to do that. Enter the waters of baptism. Come out new. Be his. And let him start working in your life. Would you stand with us and sing?